Hello, everyone. Today is Thursday, January 26th, and this is the Cluster API Provider Azure Office Hours. Thanks for joining. If you haven't been here before, just a reminder that Cluster API Provider Azure is a sub-project of SIG Cluster Lifecycle. You can get access to our document, by joining the mailing list to edit. And just a reminder that we follow the CNCF Code of Conduct. We encourage everyone to raise hands when they want to say something and just be respectful of everyone in general. Let's see. Okay, so we have a few items on the agenda today, but before we start, is there anyone here who would like to introduce themselves, say hi, just tell us a bit about why they're here if you haven't been here before? Now is your chance. I will mute. All right, I don't see any unmute buttons going on, so I think we're good. Cool. All right, so first of all, just a few quick announcements, PSAs. First one is the releases. So we have two patches that were released this week, v1.7.1 and v1.6.2. So if you're using one of those two minor versions, we encourage you to upgrade. They both contain a few bug fixes, specifically around, I believe, managed clusters and taints. So if you're using managed clusters, definitely do upgrade. Any questions or comments on that one? Okay. The second one is I just wanted to call out, and I don't think he's here, but we've nominated John to be a reviewer in CABZ. So the PR here adds him. This is in recognition of all the work he's done in managed clusters recently and being one of the primary reviewers for a lot of PRs already. So he's essentially already acting as a reviewer. So we'd like to make it official. And yeah, so thank you, John, for all your work and contributions. And if you have any comments, feel free to comment on the PR, but this PR will stay open. I don't know, Jack, do we have a plan for a consensus on this one? Or a lazy consensus?
I don't. Since we have a couple more maintainers that haven't weighed in, let's maybe set the timer to end of this week because it's been open for, I think, already a week. Does that sound sensible?
Mm-hmm.
And since I'm unmuted, just a shout out, if anyone else is interested in becoming a reviewer, I think the PR description sort of outlines the criteria. But reach out to any maintainer, we can help you. We'd love more reviewers from the community.
Yes, thank you. Let's just set the lazy consensus till Monday, maybe. That way it gives folks a chance. Cool. All right. Awesome. Okay. Now we have, okay, the only topic there is the one I added, unless anyone has anything else. But I guess I'll start with that one. So I just wanted to chat a bit about our documentation, like the book. We've had this discussion in the past, but it came up again last week or this week. Essentially what happened is we moved all the AKS managed cluster stuff out of experimental in the main branch in preparation for the 1.8 release, which is great. However, that means that our book immediately got changed to essentially represent the fact that it was no longer experimental, even though that is not true yet in a release. So we had a new user that was confused because they tried to use it and the feature flag that they still needed in the release was not being listed because you no longer need it in the main branch. So this kind of restarted the conversation around why is our book pointing at the main branch and not at the release branch? And so just wanted to talk a little about that and what we should do. To me, it seems pretty clear that it should be pointing at a release branch since that's what we're targeting users here, and users are going to be using releases. The only thing that makes it a little annoying is that it's all control on the Netlify UI. And essentially I can show you all, but this, like, just getting access to this page requires getting manually added by SIG docs folks. It's not controlled by any sort of owner's file or anything, which means that it's very like I have access, but I don't know if a lot of other people here have access. And if we wanted to add more people, we'd have to like ask to get them added. And it seems to be a very case by case basis. So that's one thing. The second thing is like we have to like change the branch every time we release in the build and deploy here. So right now it's set to main. We'd have to set that to release. And the other inconvenience is that in order for the domain to be a valid certificate on that release branch, we'd have to essentially like email support every time and ask them to add our release branch to the cert, which we've done for CAPI in the past. It's doable. It's just annoying because someone has to do it, and I don't want to be a single point of failure for that. So that's kind of where we're at right now and why we haven't made the change yet. I think Jack, you're first. Go ahead.
Okay, so I wonder if the Netlify, so essentially you're saying the canonical way to do this from a release branch is to create a per release branch version of documentation, which would essentially add a set of Netlify maintenance steps to every release that we cut. Is that accurate?
Yes. So basically we'd have to like, so right now the production branch is set to main. So we're already deploying every single branch. So the branches are getting deployed, but they're not used as our default production branch. So then we'd have to like go and do this every time. And so like right now we would set it to 1.7, but then next time we release, someone would have to come into this UI, change this to 1.8. So it's not something we can control through code. It has to be controlled from this UI.
Right, because that's what you just described right there is not actually that difficult. I was assuming it would be more like at least the legacy version of the Kubernetes upstream documentation where there is a sort of convenient alias that always gets you to the URL for the latest released version of docs, but then you can click in a drop-down box and see the docs for like 2 versions prior or something, which might have slight differences so that you can correlate your actual version of Kubernetes with the documentation. So we're not talking about that kind of granularity.
Well, we could do that if we wanted. So this would be like the default. So whenever you go to like cabz.6.case.io, this points at the main branch, but we could change this to point at the release branch. And then in addition to that, we could have something that points to like, if you wanted an older branch or if you wanted the main branch, you could do that. That's kind of what Cluster API has right now. I can show you. Yeah, like right here. So this is like all the documentation versions. So this main one points, I believe right now we're on 1.2 or whatever the latest is. But if you want to go to main, you can go to main. If you want to go to, I guess this was 1.3. 1.2 is like older. So you can go on all the previous versions, which is nice. But in order to do that in Cluster API, we had to first of all, change this, but also go into the certs and email support to get them to add all these branches to the certs.
Right, understood. So we could, it sounds like we could crawl here and just update the branch to point to the latest release, and then maybe update the documentation at the very top that just says, you know, disclaimer, this documentation always refers to the latest release. And maybe that would be a crawl version of this if we decided to go this way. Matt's been raising his hand for a while, so I'll let him go. And then I have some other stuff to talk about, but I wanted to clarify the Netlify.
No, I don't.
Go ahead, Matt.
I don't have anything major to add. Cecile, what you said at the end there was basically what I was going to say should be our goal, which, like a lot of other open source projects, you by default land on the latest release branch, but there's some navigation widget, hopefully one better than what CAPI had there, because you can see if you in CAPI, if you go back to a previous release, it's static HTML and it doesn't know about later releases. So you're kind of lost at that point. But like if you click on, yeah, see, it doesn't know how to get back to 1.3, but ideally that would be some little navigation widget that's on every page, like you have in a lot of other. So It sounds like a lot of work. It sounds like some of it is going to be kind of manual and fiddly, like updating the cert, updating the branches, and doing all that through the Netlify UI. All I can offer is I'm totally willing to help with that kind of stuff, but it feels like we should add, we should try and do the full 9 yards, I think, or maybe we could do the crawl before you run thing first.
I'm
but-
unconvinced about the full 9 yards. I would want us to have a conversation as a community to really justify the value of documenting something at like,
Well,
it's 9 months old. Like, I understand the
Sure,
historical
sure.
value of Kubernetes because the delta between releases is so significant,
Yeah.
and the release cadence is so infrequent compared to if we're releasing every 2 months and we're releasing with a user contract where we never break backward compatibility and we always tell people to get on the latest. I think spending a bunch of time maintaining docs for N-6, like, 8 months from now, doesn't make sense.
The value of N really doesn't matter. The minimum you have to do there is main and latest release branch. And then I'm just asserting at that point, maintaining a couple extra historical versions wouldn't be a lot more work. But I would advocate that we, close the door at some point. You don't necessarily want people looking at, 0.8 release and complaining about things don't work that way because we don't care anymore. On the other hand, you can't just throw away releases as soon as they go out of support because people, I mean, you could, maybe that would be the safest solution is we just do 1.6, 1.7 in main, but you at least have to do 1.7 in main. And I'm just saying, it doesn't sound like a lot more work to keep some historical branches around.
Right. I think I feel like I don't agree with that, but I don't want to
Okay.
derail this.
I mean,
That's
so
all
we
I
don't
had.
have to maintain them as in make changes to them, but they could, like, it's just like you can still go on previous tags on GitHub and look at the docs. Nothing prevents you from doing that. So like the book, like we wouldn't delete that book URL. It would still be there, but would we advertise it? Maybe not. But we would at least want to keep the 2 supported branches, like 1.6.
Yeah, it feels like it's part of, we haven't said so explicitly, but it feels like that's part of our support contract externally is the documentation is available. Right. So we would at least, I think, do 1.6, 1.7 in main. Sorry, go ahead, Jack.
I'm just not convinced because it's a significant amount of work, and most importantly,
Which
would
part
be that
is work? Like which?
maintaining the. If we do this, then there are 2 key things that we have to do in order for this to really have value. One is that the documentation from each branch that we would maintain with this Netlify UX would have to be really integral. So we would have to really be good about updating it. If we're just going through the exercise of creating URLs that point to branches, but we don't actually make sure that the documentation is really clear for each one, then it's like worse than not doing anything in my view, because you're suggesting that the documentation is really like hygienic per release. So it's a significant amount of work in my view to clean that up, especially going forward. But more importantly, we would have to be cleaning up old like N-2 and 3 and 4 versions of the URLs and making sure. I'm not convinced that it's a non-trivial amount of work. And I also think the most important thing for me is that I feel like our support policy is a really kind of like CVE emergency support policy, which is to say that if there's something really critical, we will patch an N-1 release to accelerate the process of getting that critical fix onto our user community, but not that we actually want to encourage folks not to continuously upgrade forward. So I think if we maintain like these canonical URLs for older versions, then we're no longer encouraging our community to move forward.
Yeah, I guess I don't really see the point, like your point of like cleaning up. Like to me, it's more like we're taking a snapshot in time of what the docs were at that time, and we're allowing people to go back to them. That's it. Like we're not making any changes to the docs. And I don't think that our support policy is emergency CVE only. Like we do support bug fixes, like we backport bug fixes. And so I think that's with the intent that people are given that grace period to upgrade, because we realize that the moment we release is not going to be like the moment people upgrade. So I think like the reality is there are users who are going to be on those versions still. And so we want to give them a way to see the docs that like apply to their version that they're using and not have to kind of deduct based on like new PRs that landed like, oh, this doesn't apply to me, this doesn't apply to me. So it's more like a historical snapshot more than like a living document, I think.
Right, and to be clear, that this already exists because the docs derive from a strongly versioned source of truth, which is the GitHub repository. So I guess based on that, what I'm suggesting is that this is really there's no functional change, with the exception that maybe with absent this convenience where folks don't have to go into the GitHub UI and select the right branch and then go to the markdown. Like that's definitely inconvenient. There's no doubt about that. So what I think we're really proposing is convenience with a little bit of maintenance costs. And so totally on board with the fact that our release branches are tightly coupled to the documentation that actually describes what's going on in those branches.
Cool. I think let's still focus on the crawl for now, though. Like this is all like, I mean, I think this would be useful, but it would not like be something we do like right away. I think for now we want to start by figuring out first if we can change this to release and it just works. If that's the case, that's great. Then we want to add a step in our release process that is allowing us to do that every time. But also I think before we even do that, I should try to figure out if I can get all the other maintainers added to this, well, like to have permissions to this, just because I don't think I should be the only one with permissions if there's a step in the release. So let's start with that, and then maybe then we can see if we want to have some sort of historical release branch, either drop down or place where people can see it. Does that sound good? Does anyone have any objections to or like kind of concerns about us switching the main, like the default branch to be the latest release? Does that sound shocking to anyone? Okay. Oh, got two hands at the same time. I don't know who was first.
Go ahead, Matt.
So just to clarify, are we proposing switching from main to 1.7 release branch? And that's all we do right now. So then effectively the latest docs would no longer be hosted here until we maybe do something else to, is that right?
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
This is the change.
Okay.
But I don't know if this would just work out of the box or if this requires a change to the cert. That's something we have to figure out.
Oh, right.
I'm hoping it would just work out of the box, but and then no other branch would be accessible, basically. This would be the only branch you can see in the book.
Yeah. Well, obviously a trade-off is we don't get instant feedback. If we make docs changes, we don't get to see what they look like in the real world. But since it's just Markdown, I'm not terribly worried about that.
So you do in the PR, there's like a little preview button that shows you like, I don't know if you've seen this before.
Like preview on Netlify? I guess I haven't.
Yes. So, okay, let's demo this. So let's see if there's any PR that changed docs here.
Private endpoints, maybe?
Yeah, let's try this one. So in here, there is a few Netlify actions that run, including one called deploy/Netlify, and it says preview is ready. If you click on details, it actually brings you to a deploy preview. And then this is like essentially what the book would look like with that change.
Nice.
I wonder,
scanned right over that.
I wonder if it's smart enough to evaluate the destination branch of that PR, and if it doesn't match the branch that it sources it from, it doesn't give you that UX. So we might just want to clarify this after we make that 1.7 change.
This is basically the build at that PR, so it would work.
Okay, cool.
And
I did not know about this. This is super helpful.
You can go to, where is it? Deploys. So if you have access, not everyone has access, but if you go to deploys here, you can see all the previous, like this is all the previous deploys. So like this is the production branch, for example, yesterday. So this must have been when something merged, and you can go and look at like, yeah. So I think this main dash dash actually gives us main. So I could share that URL. Actually, I think you can do this with any of the branches that get deployed. Yeah, except you don't get a cert. So that's the issue. Go ahead, Jack.
Cool. This all seems really great. I wanted to. Well, does anybody else want to talk? Because I've been talking a lot. I'm taking for granted that you'd raise your hand if you want to talk. Cool. I'm just feeling that there's something we might be forgetting in terms of how to manage PR flows and documentation. So is it fair to say that our aspiration, the best practice, is that documentation and functionality lands in a single PR, and that part of the reviewer's responsibility is to identify when any code change affects existing documentation or suggests new documentation, and to make sure that's part of the PR. So I feel like that story is durable if we make this change. So, you know, for example, a new feature lands, it's documented, everything goes to main, and then when the next release is cut, you know, we update Netlify to point to this new release branch, the documentation and the feature land at the same time. So that is good. For so other things that land in release branches are bug fixes. Sometimes we curate various things in our end-to-end tests. Those typically have no documentation side effects. So I just wanted to kind of walk through and have other folks listen to me monologue, and also maybe add your own. Like, we want to make sure that we don't have to change the way we actually land PRs with documentation if we make this change. It sounds like we don't. Are we confident about that?
Yes, I think so. And I mean, including documentation is already part of our process. And that's actually why we get in this weird place now where features get put in the book before they're actually available. Does that make sense?
Yep. Thank you for listening to me.
Okay, so I think next step is for me to reach out to SIG docs people and try to get other maintainers added before we make any changes. And then after that, try to make the change. Cool. All right. Sorry for spending so much time on this, but I'm glad we figured it out. This was important. All right. I don't see any other topics, but since John is here now, I'm going to put him on the spot again. So I said this before, but we just added, or there's a PR to add John to the reviewers list. So we just set that to a lazy consensus for Monday. Please take a look. And once again, thank you, John, and congratulations. I think this is a reflection of all the work you've done as a reviewer already. And we look forward to your future contributions.
Hey, yeah, thanks.
Cool. All right. Does anyone have any random topics or questions or thoughts that they want to bring up? Cats? Anything?
Should we look at the
Cool.
milestone?
Let's take a look at the milestone. Yes. So we're about halfway through, almost halfway through on this milestone. Things are looking busy. So I don't know if we want to, what would be most useful to folks? Do we want to just go through every single one, or should we just like go and only talk about the ones that have callouts? Okay, I will.
I think we definitely don't. It's probably too early in the dev cycle to worry about kicking stuff out, so we can probably skip that part of the process that we do toward the end of the dev cycle. Do we want to look at PRs and just? I mean, PRs, I guess, at this point in the dev cycle are probably going to land no matter what, and they get tagged retroactively if we don't do that. So, are there any new issues that we want to potentially definitely include or definitely not include?
I guess let's take a look at bugs maybe, because we don't do that very often. I kind of do that async sometimes, but I think it'd be good to see, especially the ones that haven't been triaged. Okay, I'm pretty sure. So, okay, this one has a PR, it seems. So I think that one should go in the milestone. I'm just gonna talk
Yeah,
unless someone
And
interrupts. So
thanks to
please feel
folks
free to
for
interrupt.
submitting that. I mean, as stated, I was like sort of reading. I know Cecilia, you spent some time engaging with that. There's an initial response that, like, as described, that bug is like, well, that's not a bug. That's how it's supposed to be. But it seems like, behaviorally speaking, we are putting the machine pool into a failed state erroneously. Is that right?
We are deleting the VMSS when it's in a failed state, when we shouldn't be.
Right. Well, I guess yeah, but I don't want to sidebar too much. It does.
Yeah, I think
it doesn't sound super controversial that in terms of cluster API, a machine pool going into a failed state would then get recycled to create a successful machine pool. So there must be something slightly subtle going on where we're reclassifying what gets called failed state in terms of the machine pool. So that doesn't happen.
So I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but it's essentially that we're deleting the whole VMSS instead of deleting an instance. So like a single instance getting like failed or not bootstrapping properly shouldn't cause the whole scale set to get deleted with all the other healthy instances. That's the
I
issue.
agree with that. Cool.
But yeah, let's just follow up async on that issue.
But I agree we should do that in this milestone. So thanks to whomever is filing and tracking that.
Cool. So this one, I replied, I'm pretty sure this is just a documentation or they missed the docs on this, but it is supported. I don't think this is actually a bug. So actually, let me just remove the bug label. And is there a question? How can we label this? Kind
Support.
All right. Is that working? Okay, great. This one is not really, also it's not really bug. It's more like by design. We wish we didn't have to do this, but AKS makes it so that we have to do this for now. So I don't think it's really, I mean, I don't know if anyone else has looked at this one, but I don't think it's necessarily something we can fix right away. So probably not. A 1.8. Milestone next. Cool. Okay. Poor cluster identity secret definition. That sounds interesting. I wonder if that's something we can look at after the move to workload identity or as part of that. Actually, I think this one may be by design.
Yeah, this doesn't look like a pod identity thing.
Yeah, I think so. The cluster identity secret is not owned by the cluster because it can have multiple owners. So you can share a single identity secret between owners or between clusters. And so if you move your cluster to a new cluster or to a new management cluster, you don't want your secret to follow because we don't know if that same secret is already being used by other clusters in that source cluster. So you don't want to like move it because it doesn't actually belong to that cluster. So yeah, let's reply on that one, but I'll mark it support for now. Let's see. This one, I think we might want to do in this milestone, or at least investigate. So I'll put it in there unless there are any objections. I think Noah was already looking at that. Sorry, I'm kind of going fast over these, but if anyone would like more context or like on any of these issues, feel free to raise a hand and we can dig in. This one I didn't remove the bug. Okay, agent pool is enabled to update machine pool in non-terminal state. I think, is that one that you were looking at, John?
This was the one that I couldn't really reproduce,
Okay,
so I'm not sure where to go with that one.
I'll assign you for now since you're looking at it, even if it's just to close it as not reproducible. And
There's a
then,
video on this issue.
cool. And then should this be in 1.8 or?
Yeah, put it in the milestone.
Cool. Okay, this one is, I don't think that's really a bug, more of like an improvement in UX. And I don't think this is less than 1.8. Unless anyone has any different opinions.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what the scope of it is. Is it simply, is the TLDR that we want to create a strongly typed error from a well-known error type downstream? That wouldn't be too much work, or is it more tricky than that?
I honestly don't remember, but I think it's something around the fact that like if you choose a VM size that does not support accelerated networking right now, you don't get an error as you should.
I'm pretty sure eventually you do get an error, but you have to grovel through the controller logs and see that and find the Azure error. I think he's just saying we should make this, we should pre-validate before we.
Yeah, that's hard. So VNext sounds good. Because there's no Azure API to do this.
Because it is lame to deploy, you know, a bunch of parts of the cluster and then have the VMs fail. And you have to dig through the logs to find out that that's why only part of your cluster actually came up. It would be great if we could do it up front, but I agree that's painful.
Yeah, I think we just let Azure fail for us instead of failing in the controller, which was the main point of discussion. And then maybe in a webhook, but webhooks would be more difficult. I'll just mark this as help for now. Okay. How are we doing on time? Okay, I'll time box this to another 3 minutes just so we don't spend too much time on this. Okay, this is also not a bug. I think we're overusing the bug label because it's basically a bug or feature. So let's see. This is a test improvement.
There just aren't enough kind labels.
Yeah, we could, well, I think there's enough kind labels. I think there's not enough templates. So we could probably add a more generic template and then maybe start with kind support as a kind of first.
That's right. You're forced into the templates, but sometimes you just want to submit something that doesn't actually fit one of the kinds.
I feel like 2812 is already, isn't there a PR link to that? Sorry if I interrupt.
2812.
Yep, yep, right there.
No, I think that's different. That's not the one that Ashutosh is working on. Okay, just going back to the top of the list, Matt, this one is marked as important soon. Is it still the case?
I mean, for a while I was, and I still am trying to put priorities on everything, but it's so scattershot that it's probably distracting.
Could I unmark this as a bug?
It's a bug because it's a regression. You used to log the timings, so you could consider That's why I considered
Okay.
it a bug. But yeah, whatever you want to call it, it's something we should do. It's not super important.
Yeah, it's not a user facing bug though. It's a test bug, right?
It's a development facing bug, yes.
Logging, yeah. Yeah, I don't think we have something.
And it's supposed to work.
Oh,
We did everything right with Ginkgo
regression.
V2. They just don't seem to be showing up. So I don't know.
How about kind regression?
That would be good.
Cool. Okay, there are lots. I think we should do this exercise more often. This just shows how many bug labels issues we have that we haven't looked at. Okay, this is not a bug. This is definitely a cleanup. This is proposing a rename of a resource to be consistent, I think. Kind cleanup. This one is marked as good first issue, so I won't put it in the milestone. Seems like a unit test issue. This one seems like a support. Yeah. Okay. This one does seem interesting though. I think we should look at it. Is anything that panics we should probably take a look at. I'll put this one in the milestone. Does that sound good? I don't think that's the
Yeah.
one related to the PR jack, but
Yeah, I think you're right.
same area. Okay, and then I will stop there for now. But yeah, if anyone is looking to help asynchronously, the way I was doing this is just clicking on label bug and then no milestone. And then I think especially the ones that haven't had any answers, like very few comments or no comments, are good to look at and kind of triage to see if the person is still needing help or if the issue got resolved or if it's still valid. Cool. Is there anything in the milestone that anyone wants to call out that is either should no longer be there or any updates on any of the items?
2670, is that really going to happen?
Which one's
Sorry,
that?
migrate to SDK resource manager.
This one. So I guess for that one, Matt, John, do you want to give a quick like summary of what the strategy is there on the SDK v2/ASO potential migration?
Sure. Well, so for SDK V2, I've been working on in the background. Unfortunately, I have some higher priority bugs that I haven't looked at in a couple days. But I'm trying to converting to SDK V2 versus V1 is actually relatively trivial or mechanical. Things have just changed names in a few locations. But as I said before, the SDK V2 uses generics in Go, which is a new thing for our code base and doesn't work with mockgen and doesn't work with our async framework in particular. So I've picked the public IP service, I've stubbed it out, and I'm writing sort of a replacement for the async framework as an example of how we could do this. And that could be merged on its own at some point and coexist, and so we could do this piecemeal. But I'm hoping to show that it's not that we can convert the async framework over to a new framework that works with Go SDK v2, and here's how we did it for one service. And yes, there's a lot of work left to do, but it should be relatively mechanical after that. But I'm not quite there yet.
And I'm doing
Sounds good.
something kind of parallel. So I'm working on integrating Azure Service Operator to kind of transitively consume SDK v2. So Azure Service Operator is kind of its own set of controllers that map Azure resources kind of one-to-one with Kubernetes resources. So that's something we could use to do all the stuff that we're currently using the SDK for. And I've kind of just started exploring how that might work. So overall, it sounds like Matt is probably further along with SDK v2 stuff. But that's kind of something else I'm working on kind of in the background. Go ahead, Jack.
That explanation was great from both of you. Based on what Matt said, which I think is what this is really referring to, is the scope of that correct still, given the two things that Matt and John are investigating? Cool. It sounds like a vNext thing to me, unless I'm wrong about how when we talk about refactoring the async stuff, that seems like we shouldn't fit that into the same release as like graduating AKS from experimental. It's like a big deal. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I mean, I think it may happen anyway. We may find out there's just a lot of work to do once we've proved that it could work. So it may take longer. Ideally, we want to avoid the situation, which is what, March 31st, I think is the kickoff, is the date where officially it's not supported. Now, it's not going to stop working. And if we don't make that date, then it's probably not actually going to be the end of the world, but it's what we're shooting for, I think, right? So that more or less coincides with the next release.
Cool. Is there any way to fill that requirement without refactoring async, or is it just really no? It makes sense. I mean, really. Our code has evolved for many years along with V1 SDK, so it would make sense that decoupling is not something we can do in a sort of triage, simple way.
Yeah, I think that's the case.
Yeah, I don't think that we'll close this issue in this milestone, but I think the idea is that by the end of this milestone, we'll want to have a plan for like what the actual migration will look like, and we want to have a new issue that has all the services that need to get done and a pattern that explains what exactly needs to be done for each of them, so that we can then just like divide and conquer and have several people taking the services and moving them one by one. So this is more about the exploration work than like actual completing it.
Maybe it should be retitled.
Yeah.
Cool. And we don't have a great way to deal with like epic work that spans 3 releases, for example. So it doesn't. This is a pretty academic conversation, really.
Yeah. Well, like Matt said, if we retitled it, it might be a bit better. Like we could retitle this to like exploration work and then have a separate issue in the next milestone for actually moving the services. Probably that would be better representation. Cool. Any other issues here that are worth a call out? I see there are a few Adobe folks on the call. Is there anything that y'all are looking at closely in here that you're following, hoping for?
No, from the PRs, there's the PR in there for the private endpoints that Adrian created. I'm actually doing a code review of that initial review of his work tomorrow, to hopefully send that off for a reviewer to take a look at next whenever there's time. But I'm trying to do an initial review at least before hitting the lifecycle active on it. So I believe from our needs, that's the last delta for what we need to fully go forward with everything.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. If there's nothing else, I don't see anything new got added to the agenda. I guess just a call out that I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been helping doing reviews lately. We are at 1 page for PRs, which is great. Hasn't always been the case. We were at 2 pages for a long time. So it's nice to see things getting closed and move forward. And so many active reviewers in the project. So thanks. All right. Hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you online.
Have fun,
Bye.
everyone.